It all begins in a desert, where a lone child stumbles along, gnawing on a human finger, searching for his mother. A few miles away, a car drives down a road that abruptly ends in the middle of the desert. The man driving the car steps out and continues on foot. Wyndham is a photographer who came here to capture the solar eclipse. After taking a few photos and noticing that the day is coming to an end, he tries to return to his car but unexpectedly encounters a boy who seems lost and frightened. Wyndham is ready to help, but the boy doesn't seem to want it. He points in the direction where he lost his parents and walks away. Trying to help the boy find his way home, Wyndham follows him, but the boy rudely refuses his support and leaves. The man is left alone in the darkness, with no way to return to civilization. Wyndham lies down to sleep on the ground, but struggles to do so, reliving the day's events in his mind. Suddenly, he hears strange sounds. He follows the noise and soon finds stakes with ropes strung between them, from which hang bottles that produce a melodious chime in the desert. Before him is a large canyon, at the bottom of which stands a wooden house, around which a woman is wandering, singing a song. Wyndham asks for help, but she enters the house, as if not hearing his pleas. He finds an iron ladder leading down and begins to descend. However, the ladder only reaches halfway down the canyon, and from there, it's just an ordinary rope ladder. Wyndham overcomes both and approaches the house. He knocks persistently at the door, but receives no answer. So, Wyndham opens the door himself and enters. The woman, standing at the stove, greets him calmly, as if she had been expecting his arrival. She offers him dinner, and although he refuses, she serves him some soup and places it before him on the table. Wyndham is grateful for her hospitality, but continues to ask questions about how to leave this strange place. He tells her about the boy he met and asks for water. The woman, named Alina, suggests that he rest until morning, and Wyndham gratefully accepts her care. He lies down in the bed she points out, observing as Alina tidies herself and notes that she is young and beautiful. The next morning, he gathers his things and heads outside, hoping to find a way home. But strangely, he cannot find the rope ladder he descended the previous day. Without it, reaching the iron section is impossible. Wyndham returns to the house and, taking out his camera, takes pictures of the surroundings and the drawings on the canyon walls. Everything is quite gloomy and reminds him of death in all its forms. He then notices Alina, who is busy repairing the roof, and asks her about the missing ladder, but she either does not understand what he is talking about or pretends not to. Although her words imply that there are other residents here, she does not tell him anything directly. Disappointed, Wyndham walks around the canyon, periodically calling for help, but to no avail. Later, Alina asks him to undress so she can wash his clothes, saying it wouldn't be proper to return home so dirty. The man has no choice but to comply. That night, he struggles to sleep again, goes outside, and once again tries to find a way out, but there is none. In the morning, he searches the house and, finding a hammer, tries to climb the canyon wall. Suddenly, he notices a movement above, and then a chicken carcass falls down, causing him to lose his balance and fall. Wyndham regains consciousness in the darkness. His leg is injured by his own hammer, and he cries out in pain. Alina rushes to help him, but she does not answer his questions about the children he saw on the cliff. For several days, he drifts in and out of fever, unable to distinguish between night and day, unsure if he is truly seeing children around him. But the day of recovery comes. Limping, Wyndham makes his way outside. He demands that Alina tell the children above to pull him out of there, but she pretends not to understand him. She offers him to stay, promising to take care of him and ensure his well-being. But Wyndham doesn't need this. He wants to return home, to his work. He rudely pushes Alina away, rejecting any help. The man examines his leg and realizes that it will be a long time before he can use it fully. Suddenly, he hears voices from above and looks up to see the boy holding a little girl by the hand. The pair cheerfully ask how they can help, and upon learning that Wyndham wants to climb up, the boy promises to bring ropes and pull him out with his winch. But before leaving, he asks a rather strange question about Wyndham's favorite color. Wyndham replies that it's red and begs them to hurry. The boy and girl leave, and Wyndham checks his wallet in his pocket, not intending to return for his other belongings. Suddenly, a rope falls from above, and the same boy advises him to tie himself tightly, which Wyndham does. They begin to pull him up, and the man is already anticipating his rescue, but about halfway up, the rope stops. Dangling over the canyon, Wyndham screams, then tries to climb the rope himself, but lacks the strength and ends up hanging helplessly under the merciless sun. He regains consciousness from moisture, but when he looks up, he sees the boy spraying him with a hose, mocking the helpless man. Several other children appear on the cliff, ranging from very young to older teens. They are all dressed in clothes obviously taken from other people and behave inappropriately. Taunting Wyndham, they start swinging the rope, causing him to crash into the canyon walls, instinctively calling out for help from Alina. He sees the woman shouting angrily at the foolish children and loses consciousness after another blow to the wall. That night, he wakes up in bed and immediately tries to get up. Alina doesn't understand where he is headed, but Wyndham is willing to do anything to escape. The woman explains that the children are homeless, gathered in the desert together, surviving as best they can. Neither of them notices that while they talk, the children stand on the cliff, watching the house's windows burn. The next day, Wyndham watches as Alina releases a bird, envying its ability to fly. The woman brings him a spare set of clothes from somewhere, and although he didn't ask for them, he is touched by her care. Time passes. One day, Wyndham plants a small garden at the bottom of the canyon. Occasionally, the children bring them various items, food and drinks, which surprises Wyndham since there are no stores around. He doesn't understand their behavior. First, they feed him, then they mock him, but Alina accepts it all as normal. The man becomes more involved in the household, marveling at Alina's quiet demeanor. One night, he tries to ask her questions, which are interrupted by cries from the yard. Alina advises Wyndham not to go outside when the children behave like that, but he rushes out into the night and sees the boys, dressed in outlandish clothes, gathered around the house. They start taunting him, pushing and beating him, but suddenly disappear into the night. Wyndham demands answers from Alina. Who are these children? Why do they live here? And why does she stay in this horrible place? But the woman remains calm, not admitting that she is a prisoner. That evening, she comes to Wyndham. The man, starved for female attention, eagerly welcomes her. Time passes, and the first sprouts appear in Wyndham's garden. One day, the boy in the cap calls to him from above. He is friendly and promises to bring some soda. Wyndham returns to his plants and unexpectedly finds a wedding ring and car keys buried in the sand. That evening, Alina shows him a portrait of a woman. Calling her the first mother, she confesses that she is expecting his child. Stunned, Wyndham can't believe his ears. He never wanted to have children here, especially with a woman he barely knows. He yells at Alina, but he has no choice but to accept it. The next morning, he finds his garden destroyed by local birds, but Alina willingly helps him replant, which earns his gratitude. Gradually, life in the house falls into some semblance of order. Alina runs the household, and Wyndham exercises, working on his leg. One day, the boy in the cap visits again. He is very curious and asks Wyndham many questions. Wyndham asks him to help Alina, as she is going to have a child, and they will need a doctor. The man asks the boy to bring some rope and something heavy to use as a counterweight. He plans to climb out and take them to the city, where he can take care of the woman and the boy. The boy promises to do everything when everyone is asleep or gone, but then one of the older boys appears and takes him away. Later, Wyndham tells Alina that the boy wants to study, that he is smart, different from the others, and wants to live differently. The man wants to help him, and help her too, but Alina reacts strangely. She tries to find out exactly what Wyndham is missing here. When he mentions freedom, Alina is puzzled. After all, no one forbids him from doing anything here. Isn't that freedom? Then the man tells her about the outside world, remembering the ocean and a cheeseburger. Alina doesn't know what that is, so Wyndham explains what the dish consists of. The woman admits that her mother used to say that mirages live outside. But here, in the desert, everything is real. Wyndham takes out his camera and shows her the photos he took on the day he ended up here. But what impresses the woman is not the solar eclipse, but a random shot in the car with music playing in the background. At night, he has nightmares about the terrifying faces of the children mocking someone. In the morning, he hears Alina's terrible scream from the yard, and rushing outside, he sees the boy in the cap crucified over the canyon on wires. The savages stand on the cliff, laughing. The woman suddenly declares that brothers wouldn't do such a thing. She accuses Wyndham of killing her son and strikes him on the head with a board. When he comes to, Wyndham finds himself in a cage. Despite his pleas and begging, Alina has no intention of letting him go. She feeds him like an animal, and her children come to watch his suffering. One day, he sees a girl standing on the cliff. She is clearly not from here. Wyndham catches her attention, though he is terrified to shout, fearing to wake Alina. Whispering, he begs the girl to call for help. She understands him, promises to do everything necessary, and leaves, assuring him she will return soon. Wyndham waits in hiding, watching the heavily pregnant Alina as she goes about her chores. Suddenly, he hears screams and sees the savages catching the girl. They drag her to the cliff and dramatically kill her before his eyes. Time passes. Wyndham remains in the cage. He involuntarily witnesses unnatural rituals performed by Alina, her children, and her brothers. One day, he suddenly tells Alina that he wants to stay here forever, to raise his child and love Alina, who will become his queen. He will teach the child everything he knows and is ready to give himself completely. And this is his choice. But hearing the word choice, the woman laughs. He never had one. He is just a seed blown here by the wind. And this child is only hers. The man will stay in the cage until the baby is born. After that, nothing in the desert goes to waste. Finally, the day of birth arrives. Alina screams in the house as Wyndham paces in the cage. The woman reaches him, begging for help, as she has never had such a difficult birth before. She releases the man from the cage, and he does his best to ease her pain. The children stand on the cliff, watching what is happening. Suddenly, Wyndham sees a ladder descending from above, but Alina cries out, and he stays by her side. The child is born at the moment of the solar eclipse. Wyndham takes the baby girl in his arms and kisses her, overjoyed to be a father. Alina begs him to give the baby to her, and when she receives the child, she promises to feed and protect her until she becomes the new mother. Then she will fulfill her purpose, just as Wyndham has fulfilled his now. At that moment, the boy sneaks up and slits the man's throat, exulting over the collapsing body, assuring him that he is doing it for the mother. Later, Alina gathers Wyndham's belongings and packs them in a chest, then goes to the baby, promising her that everything will be fine. Meanwhile, Wyndham's body decomposes in the yard of the house, sprouting grass and turning to dust. This is where this unusual film ends. The movie begins in Leningrad in 1940. A young woman named Anya works as a seamstress in a factory where a young machinist, Vasily, who is very serious, notices her and even asks her to introduce him to her only relative, her brother Peter. However, Anya asks for a little more time, and the young man agrees to wait until the next day. But as the girl leaves for her lunch break, he quietly follows her, admiring her. Anya walks down the street, looking at a dirigible hovering above, from which German journalists are filming the city below. At this moment, a tram driven by Peter pulls up to an intersection. Suddenly, Anya realizes that a fast-moving truck is about to crash into the tram, and her brother will likely perish. Frozen in fear, she suddenly emits light waves that lift the truck into the air and throw it away from the intersection. The tram's windows shatter, injuring people, but a major accident is averted. This entire incident is captured on film by the journalists in the dirigible. As the shocked people try to recover, Peter jumps out of the tram, grabs Anya, and quickly takes her away. The girl regains consciousness in their shared room. Peter packs their belongings, urging his sister to flee Leningrad, although she is reluctant since they have already had to move several times due to her supernatural abilities manifesting at the most inappropriate times and attracting the attention of the authorities. Peter asks her to control her powers, but Anya is unable to master them as they are beyond her control. At that moment, representatives of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs burst into the room and arrest the siblings. An investigator named Ivan arrives at the scene. He interviews the victims, and one of the women recalls the strange girl standing at the crossroad. Back at the office, Ivan begins interrogating Anya, but she cannot provide any concrete information. She insists it was just an unfortunate accident, and then Ivan shows her photos from their previous residences where strange incidents and destruction occurred, prompting the siblings to move hastily. The investigator is willing to believe she is not a criminal, especially since he has also witnessed something very strange in his life. However, Ivan is unable to elaborate as his superior, Petrov, who turns out to be his father-in-law, takes Anya and leads her to the secret facilities managed by Professor Ilinsky. The scientist welcomes the girl, explaining that she is special and now they will study her abilities. However, Anya refuses to cooperate until she sees her brother, and Ilinsky promises to arrange a meeting for them. Meanwhile, Ivan cannot calm down, although Petrov, who is also his father-in-law, demands he forget the incident and focus on other matters. He had already barely managed to suppress his absurd report about an incident in Madrid. Returning home, Ivan tries to tell everything to his wife Vera, but she asks him to take a vacation and forget everything that happened. The action shifts to 1936. A group of Soviet soldiers, including Ivan, engages in battle with Spanish fascists in Madrid. Suddenly, a man in a strict coat and hat, wearing a strange mask, appears before them. Looking at the soldiers, he utters something incomprehensible, after which Ivan's comrades start shooting themselves one by one. Only Ivan finds the strength to shoot at the man in the mask. The man quickly disappears, leaving Ivan amidst his fallen comrades. The year is 1940. A man in a mask named Neumann and his assistant Katerina arrive in Munich, where the woman meets a Jewish boy named Baruch on the street, who plays chess brilliantly. She offers him a ride with them, noting he can always leave if he does not like their school. An orphan agrees and gets into the car, where Neumann utters several hissing words, causing Baruch to fall asleep instantly. Neumann agrees that the boy is brilliant, but by no means possesses superpowers. However, Katerina is determined to help the boy. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to the laboratory where she will be studied, and fulfilling his promise, brings her to a cell to see her brother. Peter again asks her not to show her abilities, and she promises to write to him. Baruch is brought to an ancient castle owned by Neumann. The boy is laid in a hammock in a hall inhabited by many other teenagers, but when the adults leave, he wakes up and is frightened by the dark silhouettes surrounding him. Back in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to a separate room, more like a cell, and locks her in there. He then reports to Petrov that he has never seen anything like it. The girl is a scientific discovery, a unique case, to which the chief objects. She is a new weapon. Later, Anya is subjected to various tests, but she shows nothing special. Ivan cannot forget the incident, studying everything related to the strange explosion. The video footage of the accident also reaches Neumann, and he decides to fly to the USSR. There, the man is taken to meet with Professor Ilyinsky. Neumann introduces himself as a worker from the Ahnenerbe organization and immediately determines that the professor is terminally ill. He offers to ease his pain if the professor allows him to speak with Anya. Ilyinsky does not believe in his abilities, but Neumann utters something, and glowing waves emanate from him, enveloping the professor, causing him to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of this, Neumann searches his desk and takes some papers. Soon, Ilyinsky regains consciousness, but strangely feels no pain. He agrees to arrange a meeting with Anya and leads the German to the laboratory. Neumann approaches the girl and secretly shows her an execution order for her brother. Then waves of unprecedented force begin to emanate from the girl, literally blowing up the entire laboratory. Neumann grabs her and escapes. Ivan sees from the window a man in a hat whom he immediately recognizes and runs to the laboratory where explosions are heard, but Neumann and the girl are nowhere to be found. The narrative shifts to 1924. In a remote Karelian village, a woman lives with two children, Peter and Anya. One day they go with the village boys into the forest. Suddenly, a pack of wolves leaps out at the children. The children freeze in fear, but waves emanate from Anya, scattering the beasts. When the men arrive at the clearing, they find the girl dead. 1940. Petrov enters the devastated laboratory, where people connected by tubes into a single organism and marked with the letter M lie in chairs. At first glance, this structure was not damaged by the explosion, as the injured Ilyinsky lying nearby confirms. The professor reports that Anya caused all this and refuses to continue the experiments. Then, Petrov shoots him. Afterward, he goes to Ilyinsky's colleague, who everyone simply calls Professor Lyubov. Petrov asks her to activate the M squad. Learning about the professor's death, the woman refuses to help Petrov, but he reminds her of her family, and Lyubov reluctantly agrees. On the train, a customs officer searches Neumann's compartment and finds an iron sarcophagus with Anya inside. Unsure of what to do, he goes for help. Meanwhile, Anya envisions her own funeral following the incident with the wolves. Frightened, she comes to, and Neumann informs her that he is saving her. Anya tries to run, but the customs officers, who decided to detain the strange German, stop her. However, he utters something, and the military personnel bring their pistols to their own heads. Neumann and Anya leave. At the same time in Moscow, Petrov reports to his colleagues that a member of the Ahnenerbe, which translates to ancestral heritage, Neumann has stolen a valuable exhibit from the USSR, the girl Anya. A squad has already been formed to pursue the German and will depart in a matter of days. Learning of this, Ivan requests to be included, but Petrov, feeling sorry for his daughter, refuses to do so. Neumann leads Anya to a spot where Katerina's car is waiting, and she drives the pair to the castle. It is apparent that the woman does not like Neumann's new toy, but he immediately says that Anya is just like him. At the castle, they are greeted by children whom Neumann calls his army. Anya is escorted to her room, and Neumann finds a guest in his office, Admiral Canaris, who is very interested in the scientist's research. But today he has come to express his displeasure with Neumann's sabotage in the USSR, as it could start a war. Neumann reassures him and invites him to a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Anya is startled by a sound and sees Baruch in her room, trying to open her window to escape the castle. But Katerina and Neumann appear and stop him. While Katerina takes the boy away, Neumann tries to convince Anya that the castle is a paradise, and no one wants to leave of their own volition. Katerina brings Baruch to a bedroom, reminding him that he must speak only German and not tell anyone his real name if he wants to live. But when she leaves, the other teenagers attack him. In Moscow, Ivan asks his wife to help him get enrolled in the squad, after which he goes to Professor Lyubov. He is interested in whether hypnosis can make a person do what another wants. The professor asks him not to travel to Germany, but he is determined to find the man in the mask. In the castle, Anya finds Baruch hanging. The boy tries to explain that the others hate him and beat him, therefore he wants to run away. But Anya admits that it was the same for her until she became strong, and he can too. Later they find Neumann in the park, who promises Anya he will teach her to control her power. He explains that he inherited the castle from the person who adopted him, and now it serves as a refuge. He has set up Anya's room according to her taste and hopes she will like it here. Grateful, Anya sits down at the sewing machine, unexpectedly remembering how the villagers burned their house, calling her a witch. Then her brother saved her, though their mother died in the fire. Back in Moscow, Petrov enrolls Ivan in the squad and asks the commander to ensure that he does not return. Leningrad, 1937. Returning from Madrid, Ivan writes in his report everything he witnessed, but Petrov does not believe him, noting that if the soldiers shot themselves, they could be declared deserters. Tired of trying to convince the young man, Petrov takes him to Professor Lyubov. 1940. A special forces unit travels to Germany in a grain car. Ivan warns his comrades about Neumann's peculiarities, but it seems they don't quite believe him. At the castle, the children undergo daily training, while Anya enjoys the long-forgotten peace. In the morning, Katerina brings her a box with a new dress sent by Neumann for her to wear at his birthday party. The girl goes out to the hall where the children are preparing decorations for the evening, and then they head to training. Baruch is afraid of heights and falls from a rope ladder, but no one pities him. After that, it's time for shooting practice, but the boy throws his pistol down and runs to the local cemetery where Neumann finds him. Baruch asks to be let go, but the scientist promises to teach him not to be afraid. Meanwhile, Squad M climbs out of the wagon, and Ivan remembers his training in 1936 before being sent to Madrid. Then his comrades met him coldly because he was the boss's son-in-law, but Ivan earned respect through hard work and cleverness. And now he is on a special mission. Suddenly, they are hailed by an old man who turns out to be their liaison and must take them to the castle. At the same time, Petrov is informed that the squad has successfully crossed the border. Guests start arriving at the castle. Neumann welcomes Canaris and escorts him to the hall where music plays, and ladies and gentlemen drink and talk about the beautiful evening. Neumann himself is enchanted by Anya's beauty, and she gives him a hand-embroidered handkerchief she made for him. Later, guests deliver laudatory speeches in honor of the birthday boy, and he invites Anya to dance to the envy of the present ladies. Canaris notices Katerina's displeasure, but the woman remains cold, rejecting his advances. She dislikes Canaris's interest in their wards, and he tells her that people are already coming for Anya from the USSR. Squad M reaches the forest house of their liaison, who supplies them with weapons and draws a path on a map, but then shots ring out. German soldiers have caught up with the saboteurs. A battle ensues and the Russians win. Later, the commander finishes off the wounded enemies and, unexpectedly for Ivan, shoots the liaison, indicating that they have no orders to return. At the castle, Canaris agrees to play chess with Baruch, and the boy wins. The admiral admires his genius, but upon learning that the boy is Jewish, he pulls out a pistol. Anya sees the man aiming at the child, and her powers activate. Guests watch in horror as everything in the hall begins to rise into the air. The admiral himself is lifted up, but at that moment Neumann grabs the girl by the shoulder, She faints, and Canaris falls to the floor. Everything stops immediately, but people scream and scatter. The furious admiral orders all children to be destroyed within 3 days and departs. Neumann escorts Anya to her room and admires her because today she managed to stop. The girl does not understand why it is necessary to destroy the Jews, and Neumann reminds her that no one pitied them either, as they were not like everyone else. The man returns to his office where Katerina awaits him, but he does not accept her attentions because he is seriously captivated by Anya and hopes to succeed with her. However, Katerina is saddened by this turn in their relationship and reminds him of Canaris's order, but Neumann intends to make a profitable deal. The action shifts to Neumann's childhood when children laughed at him and drove him away. His parents were forced to put a mask with a digital lock on him so he couldn't harm anyone, and the boy suffered greatly from this. One day his father complained to the landlord that his son was hindering his ability to fulfill his duties as a tenant, and the man came to see the unusual child. They explained to him that Neumann scared all the guests and caused his father to lose a finger. The year is 1940. The morning after the dinner, Anya goes out to the hall, but the servants who witnessed yesterday's incident look at her warily. Then the girl goes to the park where she is met by an armed Katerina, but seeing the guards, she returns to the house. Later, Neumann conducts a meditation for the teenagers, asking Thor to give them strength. Anya sees this and asks for permission to start training. Neumann orders Katerina to stay at the castle and wait for guests, and he takes Anya away. Meanwhile, the squad continues to move through the forest. Soon they find a rubber boat at the prearranged place. Neumann puts Anya on his personal plane and takes her to his parents' house. Landing, they walk across a bridge, and suddenly Neumann asks the girl to remember her brother. Her powers activate. Water rises up, carrying fish and creating a reverse waterfall. But then the man calls her. Anya comes to her senses, and everything returns to normal. However, now she can use her powers when she needs to. Soon they enter an old house, and Neumann recalls how he was taken from his father's home. Lastly, his mother writes down the password to his mask on a piece of paper, and little Neumann leaves their lives forever. In the present, he tells that his father was a harsh and cruel man, often beating him and his mother, so he promised himself that his child would never be unhappy. The man remembers how his patron removed his mask and wanted to throw it away, but Neumann did not allow it. The man informed him that he would now take care of him, but he must trust him. Soon they arrived at the castle, where the patron confessed that every person has the right to be happy, and the boy lived for the first time like a normal child. But a year later, war came. His patron went away on business, and their home turned into a hospital. Neumann helped as best he could. Once he had to assist in the amputation of a leg. The soldier was in great pain, and then Neumann activated his powers and relieved the poor man of his suffering during the operation. Later he confessed to one of the nurses that he loved her. The adult woman laughed at the boy but said she loved him too. But one day he caught his nurse with one of the recovering soldiers, and in a fit of rage he made the soldier kill himself with a hammer. They caught him, gagged him, tied him up, and took him away from the castle. In 1940 he tells Anya that his parents died, so he is so happy to have found her. The girl lights candles in the fireplace, using her new powers, which delights Neumann. They drink wine and then become close. At night, Anya dreams where Baruch dies and wakes up terrified. She asks Neumann to return to the castle. Meanwhile, the squad reaches the river. One of the soldiers is wounded and runs out of strength. Then he takes his own life so as not to be a burden to his comrades. Only 3 remain, but they still row towards the castle. And there Katerina, who can't sleep, reminisces about the past when she helped her mother, who worked in a psychiatric hospital, where one day they brought in a tied-up boy named Neumann. She then freed him, and he promised never to harm her. The year is 1936, Leningrad. Petrov attends a lecture by Professor Ilinsky, where he discusses a significant discovery in the field of controlling human memory and emotions. Ilinsky's colleague, Professor Lubov, is inspired by the future changes, as people with good mental health will be able to work better and create a brilliant future for themselves and their children. The Project M envisions a new society where happy people with immense productivity and willpower will live. Petrov asks about the use of these discoveries in the military sphere, arguing that if a new society is to be built, it must be able to defend itself. However, Lyubov categorically opposes totalitarianism. After the lecture, Petrov offers Ilinsky full support for their program if he agrees to operate under military auspices. but Ilyinsky sends him to Lyubov as the ideational inspiration behind the project. However, the woman flatly refuses to cooperate with the military. That same day, she is hit by a car in the street. Later, Petrov returns to Ilyinsky, informing him of the unfortunate accident with his colleague, and Ilyinsky reluctantly agrees to cooperate. Again, 1940-year Germany. The three remaining members of the squad reach the castle's territory. Surprised by the lack of security, they enter the premises. Petrov receives a summary of incidents in a specific area of Germany and realizes that everything is going according to plan. His boss is horrified. His people have left a very noticeable trail, which could easily lead to the USSR being accused of provocation. But Petrov assures him that everything was planned this way and there will be no international conflict. At that moment, his daughter calls and he rushes home. The squad members reach the castle and, splitting up, begin to explore the premises. Meanwhile, Petrov finds Vera in a hysterical state. She is going mad with worry for her husband, and the father decides to take action. At the same time in the castle, Katerina reads a book to the children, and seeing her nervousness, they calm the woman. She orders lights out and leaves, just as Ivan enters the hall from the other side. Seeing the children in front of him, the man lowers his weapon and leaves. The children remain motionless. The soldiers continue to explore the castle, and now the squad leader enters the hall with the children. But he does not lower his weapon and prepares to shoot. Then the children attack first. The commander fires in all directions, but the teenagers throw their clothes at him and knock him down. The eldest orders the pistol handed to Baruch to kill the enemy, but the boy cannot shoot the man, and the man manages to wound him with a knife before being killed. The children carry the bleeding Baruch to the bedroom, leaving the soldier's body on the hall floor. The third squad member, a female warrior, finds Katerina's office and engages her in a shootout. Katerina flees, but the woman catches up to her, and they fight. The woman is defeated when Katerina pushes her away. Seeing her opponent unconscious, the German grabs a pistol but doesn't manage to shoot because Ivan appears. Threatening him with a pistol, the woman captures him. In Moscow, Petrov brings his daughter to Professor Lyubov and asks her to erase the girl's memory. Lyubov is outraged by this request, as the love for a husband is the most precious thing in Vera's life. However, under military pressure, she agrees and performs the necessary manipulations, while Petrov's subordinates methodically clear their apartment of photographs and items belonging to Ivan. But one photograph falls under a chest of drawers, and the soldier does not notice it. After the procedure, the girl regains consciousness but does not remember her husband at all. At this time, the teenagers attack Ivan, not noticing Katerina, and wound him in the arm. The woman drives off the aggressive children and escorts the wounded man to Neumann's office, where she admits to Ivan that she recognized him because she had seen him in Madrid. He asked why her master kidnapped Anya. Could it be that he wants to use her in the war? Katerina assures him that he still doesn't understand. People are petty and greedy creatures fighting for power. Neumann is unique. He is ready to seize all power on earth to save the world from war. Meanwhile, Neumann and Anya arrive at the castle and find a wounded woman on the threshold. The scientist finishes her off with a pistol while Anya runs to the bedroom to the teenagers and finds Baruch dead. At this time, Ivan is bandaging himself while Katerina explains that they teach the children survival by developing their skills, because their destiny is to save the world under Neumann's leadership. The woman offers to help him escape if he will help her, but before Ivan can hear her out, Neumann enters the door. The Russian immediately picks up a pistol and takes the woman hostage. However, the German informs him that he does not care about her fate, which visibly upsets her. At that moment, Anya runs into the office and uses her power to knock Ivan off his feet, but when she recognizes the man, Neumann quickly takes her away, leaving the Russian with Katerina. In Moscow, Professor Lyubov mourns Ilyinsky when Petrov brings her folders with the names of the condemned, whom she can save by including them in Squad M. She remembers how after the accident, Ilyinsky came to her in the hospital. The man was shocked to learn that she had been mutilated by the military, but he was frightened and could not refuse to cooperate. Now the woman is alone and forced to make difficult decisions. She takes out a vial of M activator and recalls Ivan's story about the man in the mask. After his return from Madrid, she worked with his memory, suggesting removing the traumatic memories of his comrades' deaths, but Ivan refused to erase his life. and now the young man is chained in a cell in the castle of the man in the mask. Later, Anya visits him, accusing him of killing Baruch, but the boy denies it, and he is not particularly interested in her fate. He only wants to destroy Neumann because all evil comes from him. He hypnotizes children, turning them into killers. Their conversation is interrupted by Naumann's appearance. After sending Anya away, he thanks the young man for revealing his vulnerability, as he is the only one who could stand up to him. To prove it, the scientist shows the finger shot off by Ivan in Madrid. He too is special, and Neumann really wants the Russian to join his side. Yes, he killed his friends, but it was war. He came to Ananurba to find gifted people. Anya is like him, and they are the future. He asks Ivan to admit why he is immune to his hypnosis. Then Ivan reveals that there is a whole squad like him. Squad M. There are many of them, and they will all be here soon. So Neumann cannot hide. After talking with Ivan, Neumann finds Anya in the castle's backyard. The girl asks him to hand over all affairs to Katerina and to leave this place forever. But Neumann does not want to run because they are extraordinary people, and when they are together they are unbeatable. He asks for her help in defending their new home. Later he thanks Katerina for managing the situation and confesses that he is glad she was not hurt during the Russian raid. Meanwhile, Anya remembers how in Moscow she wrote letters to her brother while locked up in the laboratory. She used to give them to the professor, but she could not have imagined that he read her letters to Peter, who was undergoing mental processing as a participant in Squad M. At this time, she burns them in the backyard of the castle, hoping that life will give her a chance to start over. Later, the castle's inhabitants conduct a funeral rite for Baruch. The teenagers carry the boy's body to the seashore, where the cemetery is located, and burn it on a ritual pyre. Anya is shocked by the number of children's graves and realizes that Ivan was telling the truth. Katerina urges her to leave and save herself. Anya runs to Ivan's cell and asks him to tell her what he saw in Madrid that was so special. The boy talks about the death of his comrades and Neumann's chilling whisper, but the German doesn't know that he just had a misfire. He is not special and survived only because of the pistol's malfunction, but if Neumann finds out, he will kill him immediately. And only Anya can stand up to him. Out of the darkness comes Katerina, who has heard everything. She will let them go if they leave forever. Neumann is planning to sell the children to Canaris, and Anya can do nothing about it. They are weapons, and it is high time the Russian understood this. But Anya runs away while Katerina frees Ivan from his chains and advises him to make sure the German never finds them. Meanwhile in Moscow, Petrov enjoys his daughter's good mood, hoping she will meet another man, marry, and give him grandchildren. The girl is lively and cheerful, unaware that the photo under the dresser awaits its moment. At this time, Neumann orders the Russian man to be killed, and he goes to look for Anya. Meanwhile, Katerina leads Ivan to her car, where Neumann's guard catches up with them. He engages in a fight with the Russian, and when he is about to kill him, Katerina attacks the guard. The guard is much stronger, and Katerina has to shoot. The teenagers hear the sound and run into the courtyard while Katerina puts Ivan in the car and drives him away from the estate. Neumann finds Anya at the cemetery. The girl asks him to let the children go, but he refuses. They are insignificant to him because he hopes to build a new world using their combined powers. Moreover, they will definitely have a son who will be the strongest and greatest on the planet. Hearing this, Anya wants to leave. Then Neumann sees Katerina's car and realizes what she is about to do. He puts on his quantum mask, which greatly amplifies the power of his voice, and begins to speak, while Ivan stands on the car step and aims an assault rifle at him. The mask works. Katerina's car loses control and crashes from a high cliff into the water, but Ivan manages to jump from the step and survives. Then, members of the second squad M, who were heading to the castle, covering for the distracting maneuvers of the first squad, open fire on Neumann. But the soldiers are programmed for total destruction, and one of them engages in a fight with Ivan, not realizing he is an ally. The young man has to kill the soldier. Neumann asks Anya to activate her power, and the girl begins to do so when she recognizes one of the soldiers as her brother. Neumann is knocked down by her force, rocks crash from the sky, and the girl runs to Peter, realizing that this time he is indeed dead. Anya's powers activate again when Neumann falls from Ivan's shot. The girl mourns her brother as teenagers appear on the road. Ivan grabs Anya and drags her away while the children pick up Neumann's body and carry it into the castle. The Russians run to the airplane and manage to take off at the last moment. 9 months later, Neumann, who survived the injury, listens to Hitler's speeches and experiments with a new kind of influence on people, broadcasting his voice through radio equipment. Meanwhile, in Anya's native village, a bearded Ivan arrives from the woods as his woman is about to give birth. Pregnant Anya is dragged into the village where women come to help. As the birth proceeds, an announcement about the start of the war with Germany is broadcast from the speakers. Later, surrounded by streams of power, Anya gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Neumann is immediately informed by a fortune-telling girl. Then one of the villagers recognizes Anya and hurries to tell his fellow villagers whom they have just helped. But Ivan stops him when bombers appear in the sky, from which a large number of paratroopers descend.
This is the police. This is the police. The scoops are on their way.
New York, 2022. The mindless activities of humanity have led to environmental pollution and global warming, complicating life for mankind. The polluted atmosphere has destroyed nearly all natural wildlife, leaving people to fend for themselves. Natural foods are scarce, and people survive on concentrates produced by the large corporation, Soylent. Their latest product, Soylent Green, is made from plankton and promises to feed everyone. However, it is currently produced in insufficient quantities. New York police detective Frank Thorne lives with his old friend, former police analyst Solomon Sol Roth, who has an excellent memory and serves as a kind of archive for Thorne. Moreover, he has preserved a police reference library to help his friend with investigations. This day begins with a conversation about a recent murder. Saul grumbles that Thorne expects too much from his notes. This isn't the Congressional Archive. Meanwhile, the power goes out. Saul reminisces about the old days when food was real and electricity worked without interruption. But people ruin nature and now everything is dying. The man sits on a bicycle which generates energy for the apartment, while Thorne heads to work, stepping over the bodies of homeless people sleeping right on the staircase of his building. The streets are clogged with old cars that, due to a lack of fuel, now serve as homes for the poor or as venues for criminal meetings. In one of these cars, a young man named Gilbert receives a metal meat hook and instructions for an upcoming job from a criminal world representative. Meanwhile, in the apartment of the wealthy William Simonson, his girlfriend Shirley plays on a machine gifted to her. She is very pleased with a successful move and thanks her master when the security guard Fielding arrives to remind the girl that it's time to go. The couple heads to a store where the vendor sells them expensive products and shows them an item completely unattainable for ordinary people, a beef tenderloin. At this time, Gilbert uses the hook to infiltrate the residential complex for the privileged and ascends the Simonsons' apartment. Seeing the young man, the wealthy man remains completely calm, making no attempt to flee or call for security. Gilbert apologizes and explains that those who sent him can no longer rely on Simonson's silence. The wealthy man agrees with all his arguments and calmly confirms that what Gilbert is about to do is necessary for God. The young man raises the metal hook and strikes Simonson on the head. Sometime later, Thorne arrives at the deceased's home to investigate the case. He questions the caretaker, who assures him that the cameras malfunctioned, and leads the detective to the apartment where Shirley meets him. Ignoring her, Thorne examines the body of the deceased. Searching the apartment for clues, Thorne finds and consumes whiskey, beef, and other foods unavailable to him. Fielding talks about the shopping trip, and the policeman enjoys washing his hands in clean, warm water. He then collects the found papers, some pleasant items like toiletries, and the food into a separate bag, taken from Simonson's bedroom. Meanwhile, Shirley is distraught, thinking that if she hadn't left, Simonson would still be alive. But Fielding refutes her certainty, saying that she likely would have died too. Later, Thorne interrogates the girl, examining her hands. He doesn't fully believe in her sincerity, but Shirley assures him that she wouldn't risk her job. The fact is, she belongs to this apartment, like furniture. Now she will wait for the new tenant if he wants to keep her. At this time, Thorne is informed about the arrival of the sanitation crew. He orders them to take Simonson to the dump, but the crew reports that the wealthy man will be sent to the incineration plant. Shirley is saddened by this outcome, as she still remembers her grandmother's proper funeral. Thorne takes the bag of items and leaves. He returns to the apartment, stepping over the bodies of the homeless, and hands Saul gifts he hasn't seen in a long time: clean paper, soap, and pencils. He also lays out a classified Soylent report related to oceanography found in the deceased's apartment. Saul is overjoyed to see vegetables and cries at the sight of meat. The next day, Thorne goes to work. His boss, Lieutenant Hatcher, is unhappy that the case is still unsolved, but the policeman is convinced that the murder was a contract killing. Nothing was stolen from the apartment, there was no security, and the killer used a meat hook instead of a weapon to simulate a simple robbery. Therefore, the first thing the detective decides to do is check the bodyguard, and after tracking the man, he finds his girlfriend, Marta's apartment. Thorne searches the place, notices a spoon on the table stained with strawberry jam, and concludes that this is too luxurious an item for the bodyguard's girlfriend. Returning home, he sits down for dinner, prepared by Saul from the products he brought the day before. The friends savor long-forgotten tastes, and then Saul gets to the report. Studying the books brought by Thorne, he learned about Simonson's biography and his longtime partner Santini, who now serves as the governor of New York. Together they created the Soylent Project, which became very profitable for its developers. Thorne goes to the phone booth on the corner and reports to the lieutenant what he has learned, unaware that the person who gave Gilbert the meat hook is in his office. Meanwhile, a party is taking place in Simonson's apartment, organized by Shirley. Thorne arrives and demands answers to his questions. Shirley can't say anything specific, as Simonson didn't confide in her. However, she does know Santini. Simonson introduced her to him. In fact, Simonson had been acting strangely in recent months, worried and even visiting church. The couple retreats to the bedroom when the building manager bursts into the hall. He behaves very rudely with the girls, and Thorne declares that he asked them to gather to ask questions. The manager is forced to back off, but the upset girls leave. Shirley offers Thorne to stay the night, take a real bath, and enjoy breakfast. She doesn't like being alone and is happy with the man she likes, as the others don't ask her opinion. Thorne agrees to the invitation. The couple takes a shower together, enjoying amenities unavailable to ordinary mortals. Later, Thorne visits the church where the deceased wealthy man had gone. On the porch, he finds a dead woman with a child tied to her hand. Realizing that the mother can no longer care for her daughter, he takes the child and carries her into the church, but the building is crowded with people who have nowhere else to go. Finding the priest to whom Simonson confessed, Thorne tries to question him. However, exhausted by the huge, sick and hungry flock, the priest only remembers the fact of the wealthy man's confession, not its details. Yet, under pressure from the policeman, he admits that the truth is killing him. It's so monstrous. Thorne returns to the lieutenant, who informs him that the Simonson case is closed, as it's a simple robbery. He asks to rewrite the report, but Thorne refuses to do so, finding everything too suspicious. For refusing to obey, Hatcher assigns Thorne to patrol the streets. That same day, Governor Santini is informed about the persistent policeman who refuses to close the case. Learning about Thorne's visit to the priest, Santini orders his elimination. Fielding goes to confession. Meanwhile, Thorne is patrolling the street where the Soylent distribution center is located. A large crowd gathers, and soon the product runs out, causing discontent among the crowd. The police recognize the danger and try to quell the unrest. However, people start rioting. The killer sent after Thorne tries to get close to him as machines with scoops arrive to load people into the truck beds and take them for processing. The killer shoots but misses, killing a woman standing next to the policeman. The crowd goes wild. The killer tries to reach Thorne, injuring several rioters and wounding the policeman in the leg. Thorne tries to capture him, but seeing the weapon, pushes the guy. He flies straight under the scoop of a machine and dies, depriving the policeman of the opportunity to question him and learn the truth. Nevertheless, convinced of Fielding's involvement in the conspiracy against him, Thorne sets up an ambush in the bodyguard's girlfriend Marta's apartment. The men fight, during which Thorne accuses the bodyguard of killing his boss and implicating the corporation in the attack on the policeman. Finally, he warns the man to stop following him, otherwise it will end very badly. After this, Thorne goes to Shirley. At this time, Solomon brings the oceanographic report to a group of scientists who call themselves the Investigators Bureau. Shirley has just finished bandaging Thorne and offers to go somewhere, but he doesn't know where they could run. Everywhere it's the same: hunger and a dying earth. The girl is upset as the new tenant is arriving today, but the policeman is sure she will please him. Meanwhile, the scientists announce the results of their research to Saul, and it is truly horrifying. Simonson, being a member of the Soylent board, learned everything, and his psyche couldn't handle it. The corporation realized they couldn't rely on him. To prevent him from talking, they eliminated him. Now, before going to the Supreme Council, they need to gather evidence. Saul is so shocked by the discovery that he decides to go to the place where they will help him die. Meanwhile, a new owner moves into Simonson's apartment. He meets Shirley and finds her attractive. That evening, Saul goes to the place, notifying Thorne in a note. The policeman immediately rushes to his friend. Saul is just answering the manager's questions. His favorite color is orange, and his favorite music is classical. The man is escorted to a private room where two young people help the old man undress. He is laid on a couch, classical music begins to play, and scenes of nature that no longer exist. Vanished forests, extinct wild animals, lost rivers, and the beauty of the ocean appear on a huge screen. At this time, Thorn arrives at the house of the Lord, and they guide him to Saul's room, but the doors are already closed, and entering is impossible. The detective can only watch his friend's last moments through a viewing window. He watches the beautiful scenes with Saul, marveling at the lost beauty of nature. But Saul notices him and is happy to be able to say goodbye to his friend. Before dying, he tells him about his discovery and begs his friend to find the evidence and reveal the truth. After waiting for the end, Thorn follows the stretcher, carrying his friend's body. The man manages to sneak into the basement, where the bodies are loaded into large trucks, and he climbs onto one of them. Soon the truck arrives at the center for processing human bodies, and Thorn watches as the bags are unloaded and sent inside the factories. The man goes inside and soon finds a conveyor belt that lowers the bodies to a lower level. Thorn follows them, and after tracking the process, the man realizes that Soylent Green is made from processed human bodies. However, the guards spot him, and the policeman has to flee, killing several guards trying to detain him along the way. He soon reaches the city and tries to contact his precinct, but the line is busy. Then Thorn calls Shirley's apartment and asks the girl to stay with the new tenant and just live. Finally, Hatcher responds, annoyed by his subordinate's actions, but Thorn doesn't have time to say anything before he is attacked by the corporation's men, led by Fielding. The man fires back and runs to the church, though he is wounded. However, Fielding rushes after him. He searches for the policeman among the people filling the church, notices blood drops, and follows them, but Thorn attacks first. A fight ensues, people wake up and scream, but the policeman manages to kill his enemy with a knife picked up from the floor. At this moment, Hatcher arrives. Thorn tells him what he has learned and urges him to tell the Bureau members that the ocean is dying, and the plankton from which everyone thinks Soylent Green is made no longer exists. Soylent Green is made from people. So the corporation is intentionally breeding people like livestock. The lieutenant promises to take the necessary measures. Thorn is taken away by paramedics, but the man continues to shout that Soylent is made from people and asks the lieutenant to stop it. The final scenes replay the images shown to the dying Solomon Roth. The adaptation of Harry Harrison's novel turned out to be terrifyingly beautiful and compelling. The most frightening thing is that there is no resolution, nor can there be. Even if people learn the truth, what will change? And the focus of the plot on ordinary people conveys the fragility and insignificance of human lives, which remains unchanged throughout all times. One day, the ruler of the Murakami province receives a warning from a neighboring feudal lord who has decided to seize a mountain to build a castle there. However, Lord Murakami orders the messenger to be killed and prepares to defend the village. Sometime later, the mountain is besieged by the neighbor's army, confident in victory and mocking the lord, whose face is hidden behind a mask. He sends his soldiers into battle, but the small group led by the Lord standing before them extends their hands forward, and the entire army falls, destroyed by an unknown weapon that literally pierces their bodies. Present day. At a university, a group of students studying paranormal abilities gathers. One of them, Yoji Minami Maru, nicknamed Nanmaru, possesses a small supernatural power, the ability to create tiny holes in everything, which he demonstrates on a stack of paper. The young people are impressed by his skill, but Nanmaru himself doesn't consider it useful since he can't even find a job. Just then he receives a summons from Professor Murakami and heads to the Department of History and Folklore, where he meets lecturer Emi, who is worried about the professor's absence. Murakami had gone on a research trip and disappeared. The woman is surprised by the boy's last name and asks about his family, but he can't recall anything of interest. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, located on Mount Murakami, a girl named Sachiko wakes up from a nightmare. Her grandmother brings her milk and tries to calm her down. Back at the Paranormal Enthusiasts Club, there's a disagreement, and one of the boys remarks on the uselessness of Nanmaru's ability. The boy gets upset and recalls how his grandfather taught him to punch tiny holes in objects by shouting, believing his grandson was special. At this moment, he is found by student Emi, Tagai. The thing is, Emi, while researching his genealogy, discovered a common ancestor in the boy's family and the professor's. She asked Nanmaru to help search for him, as the last case Murakami studied was the murder of their ancestor. The boy's parents can't help since their family moved away from there a long time ago. In the morning, they show him a model of the village made by Tagai, and Emi tells an ancient legend in which Nanmaru's ancestor betrayed Lord Murakami, leading to his death in battle. However, the professor found a written account that during the battle, all the enemies perished, with only one person on Murakami's side. And 10 days later, a festival took place on this spot, which would be very strange if the residents had betrayed and killed their lord. Tagai draws everyone's attention to the shape of the mountains around the village, as if they were artificially created. But who could have done such a thing back then? Later, Nanmaru demonstrates his ability to his new friends, which greatly impresses them. Meanwhile, in the town of Marukawa, an official notices a strange black circle on a window pane. He reaches out, and his hand seems to be cut off, and then the man's head splits, as if struck by a spherical object. At the university, Emi asks Nanmaru to show his ability, and tells him that the professor also learned to punch holes in objects before he disappeared. However, they were much larger. At this point, the boy suggests that the ability might have come from their common ancestor. At that moment, everyone hears the news about the murder of the official in Marukawa. Nanmaru suggests they search for the professor themselves. The action returns to medieval times. Lord Murakami vows not to let anyone invade his lands. His fingers begin to extend, and strange round marks appear on his wrists. Present day. The students, along with Emi, arrive in Marukawa and begin searching for the professor, but no one has seen him. However, the young people find armor with round holes in the local museum, and on the local lord's banner, they notice the image of a magpie, a human hand, and a circle, the meaning of which no one knows. They discover that after Minamimara's death, his lord gave his youngest son to his family so the lineage would not die out. So Nanmaru is a descendant of the lord himself. They question people on the street, but no one has seen the professor. Soon the students find the building where the murder occurred, and for the first time wonder if Nanmaru's ability could punch through window glass. At a cafe, the group learns about the upcoming Tanabata festival. The men sitting at a nearby table suddenly mention that the professor's presence will make the festival unforgettable and lead to the lord's revival. Tagai asks questions, but the men pretend to know nothing about the professor. Then they hear Nanmaru's name and become excited. Later, the friends joke about how the locals consider Nanmaru to be the lord and practically worship him. Emi reminds them that Tanabata is Japan's Day of Lovers, celebrated on July 7th. On this night, the stars Vega in the constellation Lyra and Altair in the constellation Aquila, separated by the Milky Way, come closest, and the magpie lays a bridge between them. But what do these facts reveal? The next day, the group goes to the mountain where the festival will take place and finds 7 strangely shaped stones standing in the middle of a clearing. Later, Sachiko visits Nanmaru, wanting to see the boy's abilities. He punches a can, but it seems that the girl expected something different. In the evening, Emi suggests returning to Tokyo because she doesn't trust the locals. Meanwhile, the hotel owner makes a phone call, reporting that Nanmaru can make holes in objects. The next day, a young man whom Sachiko calls her brother and clearly fears enters her home, but the grandmother asks him to leave and never return. Nanmaru meanwhile goes to the cafe, and the owner reminds him that this village is his real home. The boy asks Sachiko to explain her comment about the man who can achieve, and she arranges to meet him. In the evening, the girl explains that in the town, 2 types of people with superpowers are born: achievers and window openers. There are only 5 of the former, including Nanmaru, but the latter are those worthy of becoming priests of Mount Murakami. The boy doesn't understand what's so exciting about this since the hole is so small, but the girl abruptly cuts him off. She just wants to live a normal life. After all, she is a window opener. Meanwhile, Sachiko's brother Takashi is walking among people and encounters some local guys. Emi notices a strange glow over the mountain. She and Tagai head there and see a group of people in white robes, dancing with torches in a clearing, summoning someone. Meanwhile, the guys beat Takashi and, pulling off his hat, see a stone embedded in his forehead. They leave him on the road. Emi and Tagai sneak closer to the dancers and see a masked man performing some kind of ritual. After the people leave, the pair approach the stones and realize there are only 6. It means that each day of the festival, 1 stone will disappear. At this moment, Takashi raises his hands and his attackers lose their legs. Another group of people in white arrives at the mountain. Meanwhile, a newspaper article is published about the outrage of local residents protesting the construction of a golf course on the mountain's peak, as this place is sacred to them. At this time, the people in white capture Emi and Tagai, but she shouts the professor's name, and one of the men uncovers his face. It turns out to be the village head, who led the Tanabata ritual passed down through generations in the Murakami family. They apologize and ask her to describe what she saw. Emmy recounts the first group that had already been there. Returning to town, she asks the students to leave while she stays to find the professor, as she is sure he is alive. In the morning, Nanmaru says goodbye to Sachiko and exchanges emails with her. Later, Emmy sees the students off just as Takashi arrives at the hotel and realizes that the boy has left. Noticing that the hotel owner is making a call, he smashes the phone. He finds out the boy's address in Tokyo and leaves. He later finds Nanmaru at the club and begins teaching him how to use his power. He raises his hands and a sphere grows between his palms, which he calls a sphere beyond reality. It can easily dismember a person or another object. Nanmaru follows his advice and creates his first sphere. Seeing its size, Takashi runs for water and trying to pour it over the sphere, breaks the bucket. He then convinces the boy that they are chosen. All of this is witnessed by Nanmaru's classmate, Aki. Later, Nanmaru writes to Sachiko, and she advises him to stay away from her brother. At the cafe in Morikawa, unknown men in black suits arrive, which the owner immediately reports to the town leader. He orders everyone to keep their mouths shut. On the same day, the professor calls Emmy, apologizes, and tells her that his window has opened. He assures her that he didn't kill anyone and says goodbye to her. In Tokyo, a meeting takes place with a politician who wants to run for a higher office. While he is speaking to the assembled crowd, a man with a masked face enters the university building and places his long-fingered hands against the wall. Suddenly, a huge black sphere appears on stage, right in front of the politician. The man reaches out to it, and his body is immediately sliced in half. Meanwhile, Emmy returns to Tokyo, and Nanmaru demonstrates his new abilities, which frightens his friends. After all, this is how the murder in Morikawa happened. That night, Sachiko visits her grandfather, who has round marks on his arms and a stone grows in his forehead. Meanwhile, the person who ordered the politician's murder, known as the Baron, watches the footage of the event and praises his subordinate for coming up with such a way to dispose of an undesirable person, but the murder in Morikawa was unnecessary. Therefore, he needs someone more obedient. That morning, Takashi comes to Nanmaru again to suggest that he participate in a project to train people in superpowers. A significant number of people attend this paid seminar. Under Takashi's guidance, Nanmaru demonstrates his power by smashing a metal statue. This causes unprecedented excitement among the audience. Nanmaru himself is delighted with the fee he received, unaware that Takashi and his accomplice, host Yokihara, earned hundreds of times more. The guys discuss Nanmaru's foolishness, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation. That evening, the Baron is informed that one of the achievers lives in Tokyo. Meanwhile, Nanmaru notices a strange growth on his forehead. At the same time, Emmy continues studying the professor's papers and suddenly seems to see him. Murakami reminds her that Tanabata was first celebrated on April 29th, and so it has always been, but it's already May now. Emmy rushes to check the records and realizes that the dates have changed. In the Western Gregorian calendar, they coincide, including the very first, but this calendar was only introduced in 1582, and only in Catholic countries. But how could it have appeared in Morikawa? Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues participating in seminars, supposedly teaching people superpowers. The boy tries to explain that not everyone can do this, but no one believes him. Then Aki lets him listen to the recording she made. Nanmaru refuses to participate in the seminars, explaining that his power is not meant for deceit. Meanwhile, in Morikawa, Sachiko meets a masked man at her mother's grave, whom she calls Lord Yoriyuki Murakami. At the evening gathering, the town leader reports to Sachiko's grandfather about a group of outsiders looking for achievers in their town. He reminds them of the rules: no one should know the village's secret. The next day, Yoriyuki is brought to the Baron. The achiever demands that the village be left alone, but the Baron claps his hands and 4 armed men run out of the neighboring rooms. However, Yoriyuki is much faster, and all fall with pierced heads. He agrees to work temporarily for the Baron and removes the mask from his face. The Baron is horrified to see a completely inhuman face. Meanwhile, Nanmaru continues to look for a job where he could properly use his power. Suddenly, he hears calls for help. Passers-by have found a child in a locked car. They locate the mother, but she has lost her keys and cannot open the vehicle. Seeing the boy losing consciousness from the heat, Nanmaru uses his powers to smash the car's window. People are impressed, and the mother thanks the savior. Later, he sees a news report about the incident, but these same shots catch the attention of Takashi and Yokihara. They begin vandalizing the signs of establishments with problems. TV reports about them start to appear, raising social issues. Everyone discusses the unknown boy, whom they nickname Chisel. The police start an investigation. The Baron is displeased with the commotion, but Yoriyuki assures him that he knows who is responsible. Meanwhile in Marikawa, people believe that Takashi is behind all this. Sachiko's grandfather and the professor ask the girl to go to Tokyo. Following his friend's advice, Nanmaru decides to become a janitor, thinking he could simply destroy the trash. However, the group soon notices that the mark on his forehead grows with each use of his power. One day Sachiko arrives in Tokyo. She confesses to Emi that the town lied. The professor was there all along. Now he hands his assistant a letter of apology through Sachiko. She explains that all the town's residents have been having nightmares. Their conversation is interrupted by Namaru's arrival. The girl notices the mark on his forehead, but the boy doesn't understand her hints. He points out the place where Takashi might be. At another seminar where Takashi continues to deceive people, a delegation from the town arrives and demands that these activities stop. Takashi, pointing at Namaru, accuses the boy of wanting to monopolize the gift, and no matter how much Namaru yells trying to explain the truth, people don't listen. Then Sachiko steps forward. She accuses her brother of lying and calls him a killer. Takashi raises his hands as if preparing to create a sphere, but at that moment a loud pop is heard and a huge hole appears in the window. Yoriyuki, standing below, calls Takashi to him and the ladder runs down. He orders Takashi to stop deceiving people, but the seminar attendees don't want that, so Yoriyuki instantly creates a massive sphere and blows off part of the roof. He explains that no one can develop this gift, even after thousands of years of training, and shows his hands. But upon noticing Nanmaru, he suddenly declares that the boy must be erased. Sachiko shields him with her body, and the blow strikes the ground. Later the townspeople explain to Nanmaru that Yoriyuki Murakami would have been the ruler of the settlement in ancient times. Now he eliminates disobedient telekinetics. That's why he took Takashi away. Uncontrolled power is a threat to the village's existence. Nanmaru doesn't understand. Hasn't anyone ever used the gift for good? But he is abruptly cut off. Later Sachiko and Nanmaru have dinner together and he shows her Tokyo at night. Nanmaru receives his first job order for trash removal. That night Sachiko asks for permission to stay with him. She explains that the village residents fear the dark side of the gift and shows Nanmaru her back, scarred and disfigured. The girl also shows him a family photo that includes Yoriyuki, who once looked like a normal person and loved her mother. However, according to village customs, the girl was married off to another. Her father couldn't accept that his children exhibited a weak power, constantly harassing his son and forcing him to train. Her mother, tired of the constant strife, asked Yoriyuki, who had become the mountain's priest, for help. He began training Takashi, who eventually created his first sphere. The boy started visiting the priest frequently, which didn't please his father. After gaining his gift, Takashi became aggressive and took out his anger on his little sister. When everyone was on the verge of breaking down, Sachiko began having dreams. One day she overheard an argument between her father and Takashi in the garden and caught her brother standing over her father's bloodied body. Takashi insisted he didn't do it, but their mother expelled him from the house. The grandfather and the village residents covered up the incident. One day her mother went to the mountain, asking the girl to bring Yoriyuki, who had already lost his human form. On the way she talked about her nightmares, but he confessed that everyone saw them. They reached the mountain, where her mother left this world. Afterward, Yoriyuki left the village, only returning when he learned that a developer wanted to desecrate the mountain. Takashi wouldn't have been able to do it, being too small-minded and self-centered. She's glad that Nanmaru sees the gift in a positive light. Meanwhile, the police start investigating the disappearance of their officers. One detective constantly recalls the incident on stage and meets Aki, who insists that the spatial sphere is no mere trick. Suddenly, Namaru suggests to his friends that they shut down the project, believing the gift is too great for mere trash removal. Later he goes to see Emmi, who tells him that she found a few strange phrases about the solar years in the professor's letter. She compared the facts and realized that the village used a solar, not a Gregorian, calendar. During the festival, the solstice was always present. Thus, the Tanabata festival lasted 3 days before the solstice, 1 day during it, and 3 days after. Namaru later takes a job with a cleaning company. Meanwhile, Aki suggests that the detective team up with her to investigate the unexplained incidents. That night, Nanmaru has his first nightmare, where he falls into a void. Suddenly he hears Sachiko screaming, begging him not to approach the other side. Ahead he sees an opening door and wakes up. The next day, a car, a boat, and a plane disappear in the city. Aki and the detective track down Yoriyuki, who arrives to meet Takashi and warn him about the danger of opening windows. However, Aki and the detective are caught by the Baron's men. Yoriyuki then demonstrates the disappearance of a prominent politician right at the door of a nearby building. The guards drag in the bound Aki and the detective, but Yoriyuki leaves, not considering them important. Meanwhile, Nanmaru starts work, clearing old items from an office. Suddenly he realizes that these items were precious to someone and have a history. He runs to the roof where the others are working and asks for permission to leave some things in the building. His co-worker agrees and begins asking Nanmaru about his abilities. At that moment, they see a massive sphere floating above the city. The next moment, it bursts and erases several buildings. It turns out Yoriyuki is doing this a few blocks away. Seeing the explosion, people mistake it for a terrorist attack. Panic ensues. Nanmaru runs with everyone else and suddenly finds himself in a field strewn with the bodies of medieval warriors. But before he can be scared, he returns to his time. Yoriyuki tells Takashi that he will soon put an end to the nightmares. Meanwhile, in the village, Sachiko hears an announcement about the disappearance of 200 people in the destroyed buildings. Her grandmother doesn't believe Yoriyuki did it. After all, he was the protector of the people, but many eyewitnesses saw the massive black sphere and no one else possesses such power. Sachiko asks her mother for help. Nanmaru continues having nightmares, where Sachiko begs him not to approach the windows, or else he will find himself on the other side. The next day, the government declares a quarantine and asks everyone to stay home. Meanwhile, in the village, people discuss the events, not believing that their Yoriyuki could have done such a thing. Meanwhile, the detective regains consciousness and finds that they are in some basement. Sachiko's grandfather contacts Emi, after which she decides to go to Markawa. Nanmaru finds Takashi in his room. He accuses him of killing people, but Takashi explains that Yoriyuki wants to end the nightmares. He suddenly asks the boy to do him a favor and convey his apologies to Sachiko. Nanmaru admits that his sister doesn't consider him a killer, and that turns out to be the most important thing for him. At the same time, Yoriyuki decides to break off the deal with the Baron and informs his bodyguard. Before leaving, Takashi gives Nanmaru a piece of paper with the address and plan of the place where Aki and the detective are being held. He goes there and arrives just as one of the bodyguards forces the detective to shoot Aki. But then the Baron calls, ordering him to come immediately. Nanmaru distracts the remaining guard by creating a sphere and tries to free the captives. However, there is another guard who points a weapon at him. The detective tries to interfere and the gun falls, wounding the guard. The men struggle, and Nanmaru creates a sphere, preparing to send it at the guard. But Aki screams, the boy comes to his senses, and he breaks through the wall. He frees the captives and leads them out. Later he notices that the stone in his forehead has grown, and realizes that he almost killed someone recently. Meanwhile, Yoriyuki tells the Baron that he needs to experiment with the sphere's precision and flight range. After he leaves, the Baron realizes the danger of the monster and plans to go to the Prime Minister. But at that moment, the city center is engulfed by a giant sphere, and a massive hole in the ground appears where the building stood. The next day, all channels broadcast news of the deaths of people in the newly formed craters. The government urges residents to stay home. However, Nanmaru goes to meet his friends, who are joined by Aki. Nanmaru recalls Yoriyuki's words about getting rid of the nightmare and promises to go all the way to find out what he meant. Gathering together, the group heads to Markawa, where they are met by Sachiko and a delegation of locals. Nanmaru recounts Yoriyuki's words about the nightmares, but none of the locals hurry to explain. Emi then sternly urges them to avoid another incident with the loss of lives. She wants to know what the windows are, why the Tanabata festival is needed, and what the role of the mountain priest is. However, the villagers admit that they don't understand Yoriyuki's plan. Nanmaru loses his temper. He respects the town's customs, but the power of the mountain kills, and Yoriyuki is a killer. The town leader promises to introduce the group to the master, Sachiko's grandfather. He also plans to invite Professor Murakami to the meeting. In the morning, Yoriyuki and Takashi arrive at the master's estate. The maid greets the guests and rushes to warn the master of the unexpected visitors. The old man immediately accuses Yoriyuki of killing the official, but Yoriyuki reminds him that the man wanted to destroy the sacred mountain by turning it into a golf course. Yoriyuki has found answers to his questions and is ready to break the rules. The pair are about to leave, but suddenly the visitor stops. He senses armed men hiding in the yard and prepares to fight. The Baron's men open fire, but the bullets don't touch Yoriyuki. The maid rushes to her master. Meanwhile, Nanmaru's group walks along the road leading to the estate. Sachiko tells Nanmaru that the locals fear him. Deep down, they are vassals. The town leader thanks Tagai for the model of their area, saying the professor told him it helped solve the problem. At this time, in the master's house, Yoriyuki distributes the exits to attack the enemy from different sides. Meanwhile, soldiers burst into the master's bedroom and open fire. Yoriyuki tears them apart with a sphere. Nanmaru's friends hear the shots and run to the estate. The Baron's assistant brings in reserve troops and orders the estate to be surrounded. Yoriyuki and Takashi are caught in a circle. They stand back to back, grow spheres, and kill the soldiers. Yoriyuki creates a whole bunch of spheres. One of the soldiers, dying, shoots Takashi. When Nanmaru's group arrives at the estate, they find a pile of bodies. The old master, dying, orders them to stop Yoriyuki. Namaru and Sachiko step into the yard as the Baron's men leave the estate. Yoriyuki is leading the wounded Takashi along the forest path, but the boy is getting worse. Eventually, he falls and dies. Namaru and Sachiko also find the forest path and soon see Takashi's body. Sachiko takes her brother's death hard. Meanwhile, Emi finds a handprint on the door with long fingers, belonging, according to legend, to the monster Kasasagi. Later, the group returns to the town, where they are unexpectedly stopped by Sachiko's grandmother, who asks Nanmaru to go with her, as she received an order from the new master, Professor Murakami, to protect the boy. He ends up at Sachiko's house. In the evening, the young people meet on the veranda. Sachiko asks him to be careful and offers sweet sake, which helps with nightmares. She believes that the dead turn into stars in the sky. The distance between them is vast. No matter how much you scream, no one will hear you, and the loneliest thing is your own death when you are the only one stepping out of the window. The girl talks about her nightmares where she is searching for someone. Unexpectedly, she finds herself on a mountain where she feels the presence of someone beyond the Milky Way, and they extend a hand to her. Namaru grabs her hand and confesses that Takashi regretted his behavior. Sachiko, however, hopes that her brother did not go into the darkness alone. That night, Emi struggles to sleep, replaying everything that happened in her mind. The next day, despite the police's order to stay indoors, the men of Marakawa arrange a meeting, not noticing that Aki is recording their conversation, which he later shows to Emi. The friends discover that there are no news reports anywhere about the massacre in the town and decide to go to the meeting. Meanwhile, the police knock on Sachiko's grandmother's door, searching for Nanmaru, but the girl leads him out through the back door. However, Nanmaru is convinced that the police are looking for Yoriyuki. In the evening, the residents on their way to the meeting are stopped by the police. A confrontation ensues, which Emi and her students observe. Then the Baron's men arrive, also seeking to capture Yoriyuki, but the residents refuse to hand over their priest. The Baron's assistant fires a shot over their heads, claiming that Yoriyuki possesses a terrifying power that could destroy the planet. At this point, Nanmaru intervenes, suggesting they meet with Yoriyuki first to let him explain his actions. When people start shouting again, he creates a sphere. Nanmaru admits that he doesn't know why he has such abilities, but there can be no talk of betrayal by the town. Then Professor Murakami steps out from the crowd. Emi is horrified to see the enormous stone in his forehead and faints. Namaru is at a city council meeting. He asks them to agree that he will convince Yoriyuki to talk to the police and the Baron's men. Guards will wait for him on the mountain to persuade him to leave the town without harming its residents. Later, he informs his friends that the professor wants to meet with them in his laboratory. In the morning, the team goes to Murakami. They gather around the model, and the professor begins his explanation. The village festival was established and held for 7 days during Tanabata, the summer solstice. In Chinese history, from which this festival originated, it symbolized a magpie that bridged the Milky Way. It was also on the Lord's flag, but it turns out that magpies didn't exist in Japan at that time, so it must have been something similar. The professor asks Tagai to help him, smears his hand with ink, and asks him to make a handprint. He then shows Yoriyuki's handprint left at the master's estate and aligns them in a specific order. The group immediately recalls the Lord's emblem in the Marakawa Museum. It looks as though a long-fingered hand is passing a sphere to a human hand. The professor asks them to look at the model. Tagai immediately notices that the mountains seem artificial and that Tanabata takes place on the solstice days when a second sunset can be seen. Murakami simulates the sunset during the solstice, and the group is surprised to see 2 hands and a black sphere between them in the mountainous landscape. The professor marvels at the unknown master's creation, an enormous earth sculpture spanning several kilometers. One might consider that it was created by the Kasasagi, who appeared in this area, perhaps from the sky. How would people have reacted to this? After all, according to the peasants' beliefs, the entire land was inhabited by gods, and they couldn't always distinguish between good and evil. The Kasasagi, who became gods to them, began visiting this planet regularly, as mentioned in many tales and legends. And if you look at Mount Murakami, you can see that it resembles a helicopter landing pad, so the festival torches served as guiding lights. The festival itself began as a ceremony to welcome the gods during the summer solstice, but at some point, the Kasasagi stopped appearing. Yet for thousands of years, people continued to meet them, even though they never came. However, the town became trapped in its beliefs. Invisible chains keep the initiates in one place. Fear and loneliness are what lie beyond the window, and the window openers have to wait for the Kasasagi. The professor and Sachiko are among those the visitors learned to reach thousands of years ago, using their minds. The large flag on the mountain most likely symbolizes loyalty and a reminder that one should not leave this earth. For this, fear is instilled in the window openers. That's why the locals have protected this mountain for every era. It's hard to believe, but it's unknown whether the Kasasagi will ever return. They may have died long ago. The next morning, the guards on the mountain come out for breakfast, and later Emi and her students arrive. The professor is concerned about their well-being and suggests they all go to the city, but Nanmaru refuses. He feels obligated to be the first to meet Yoriyuki. Murakami supports his decision as the townspeople need protection. Each generation of priests has ingrained the sacred duty into their minds, but the professor is the only one who thought to create a model and can now visually show people what is really happening here. They light bonfires to show Yoriyuki that there are people here. After all, he most likely wants to destroy the mountain. That would end everything, but the people are becoming hostages. In the evening, the students and Nanmaru go on watch. The boy asks Sachiko about her dreams and suggests they leave this place to start a new life. Moreover, he feels something for her. At that moment, the Baron's men appear. They haven't waited for Yoriyuki and demand to know where he is. Otherwise, they'll start killing the townspeople. The professor is outraged and even creates a sphere, but then one of the Baron's soldiers shoots his comrades and removes his helmet, revealing himself to be Yoriyuki. Those who haven't seen his form before scream in fear. The Baron's assistant tries to shoot him and immediately dies from a sphere. Yoriyuki admits that he always imagined the black sphere as a trash chute. He simply pushed those who posed a threat to the village into it. But now, he doubts that. The ancestors, the Kasasagi, might have contacted their descendants many times, but most of them didn't develop the ability to leave with them unharmed. He believes that his ancestors were from other stars. They possessed knowledge and logic foreign to Earthlings. But what if it's not a window but a gate? And by entering the sphere, you can be transported to the ancestors' planet? That's why he changed his plans. At that moment, people see a huge black sphere above their heads. Yoriyuki announces that he intends to leave with the Kasasagi. Sachiko suddenly asks him to take her with him. The dark world is calling to her, and she wants to find peace. Nanmaru reminds her of her dreams. The girl reaches out, and through the darkness, she sees an inhuman hand beckoning her from another reality. But just as she is about to grasp it, Nanmaru grabs her wrist. Yoriyuki shakes his head. Nanmaru will never understand the feelings of the window openers. The boy agrees, but he doesn't like that the girl is ready to go into the afterlife without experiencing even a small part of this vast world. Here there is wisdom, mistakes, and attempts to start over. The world is thousands of years old, and compared to that, all superpowers are insignificant. He doesn't want her to leave and asks her to stay. The girl agrees. She remembers how her mother once left for the sphere. Yoriyuki also recalls that moment and promises to wait for her. The sphere begins to grow, and Nanmaru orders everyone to run. The people rush down the mountain while Yoriyuki stands under the sphere, waiting for it to consume him. A massive explosion occurs. Nanmaru's team manages to take cover in the forest, and the town's electricity goes out. Time passes. Tagai enrolls in graduate school. Emi and Murakami resign from the department and now live together in Marikawa. Aki has become an independent internet journalist and now lives with the former policeman. The people of Marikawa quickly reconstructed the area where the mountain once stood. Nanmaru has opened a company where people exchange items without using money. It's strange but highly successful. He no longer uses his abilities, which means his appearance will remain unchanged. One day he goes to Marikawa, where a festival is scheduled to take place in the evening. After all, the festival continues in the hope that someone will come from the Milky Way, and Sachiko lives in her house, always waiting for Nanmaru. The series is based on the manga by Hitoshi Iwaki, the author of the famous Parasite. While the middle of the plot may drag a bit, the finale ties everything together and thoroughly explains the events on screen, which is a rare feat in modern cinema.